Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Committee of the Whole work session today, Tuesday, September 17th. And as you can see on our agenda, we have minutes from our previous Committee of the Whole work session. And then we are going to be discussing tax abatement for the Heights apartment project. And we have a couple of guests with us this morning. Welcome to both of you, and we're looking forward to getting a little update on the Heights.
Thank you for having us. Oh, do we need 2 minutes for it, or?
Nope.
Oh, okay, sorry, I thought there
We
was
don't vote on anything, we take no
Right.
action.
Right.
Informational.
Committee of the Whole.
For the public, we should say our guests are Jason
Oh.
Hale, Executive Director of the Cook County Housing and Redevelopment Authority, and Gary Latz with the Cook County Real Estate Fund.
Thank you, Administrator.
And to bridge off of your comments, and we're here today to help explain any questions you might have about the project and the financing, particularly the tax abatement. The objective is that you will be in a position to make an informed decision next week at your meeting, where we will be bringing this to a vote for approval.
Maybe dovetailing off of that, Gary. So we went with the City Council last week in a similar forum to just help explain, here's where we're at, here's the project, and of course if you have any specific project questions, Gary has a lot of details for you. And he's managing the project more actively, of course. I'm on the side representing the HRA and the city and county in this case, trying to advocate for housing generally, right? So I thought what might be useful is to bring us back to February of 2024, when this board reviewed this initial request, as did City Council. And it was an up to amount for an up to term, because we didn't know the details we know today. And we needed to get that approval to leverage for the IRRR application that we were submitting, which was due in March. And then, of course, we were awarded $630,000 from IRRR. The ask, I believe, was $750,000, but there's only so much to go around, and I think Cook County made out pretty well in that funding round. So, again, we're grateful for that, for IRRR. But since then, of course, we've done, in particular the Gary, but I don't know how many hours of spreadsheets we've been working on together on Zoom. But a lot of work, and in the last month and a half or so particularly, I've been working closely with Ellers. And I know the city and county both contract and consult with Ellers, which has actually been really useful in this regard. My role has been, and I kind of tease Gary about this, but it's true. My role is to figure out what the project actually needs, not what they want. Because the HRA's role is to try to advance housing, of course, and to bring resources to get it over that finish line, but not to over subsidize or provide more than is needed to make the project viable. So that's one of the roles that Ellers plays, is we rely on their robust and thorough expertise, and they're doing these projects across the state all the time, to look at what the projections are for this project, what the IRR, internal rate of return, is projected to be, all of the perform analyses to understand, is this reasonable and is it in line with what they would expect. I want to make a statement that I made at City Council that I think is important to remind generally the public. Everything's a projection until reality happens. From like what you're going to eat for lunch to how this project will perform in 10 years, right? So all we have is the best data we have to make informed decisions. And so Ellers actually plays a really useful and fundamental role. They had their system, they have a proprietary spreadsheet that I've got glimpses of. I would love to get it someday. But it's just so robust in how they fill all the information out. And we have done a lot of back and forth with them to answer questions as we've got more data. All of that leads to, I believe, James, I don't know if you provided in their packet, Ellers had a memo that I sent. No?
No, I did not.
Okay, I wasn't sure. I'm happy to send that. I don't know if it would be helpful.
I didn't know, Jason, if you wanted that included.
No
or
problem.
If we were going to wait on that.
Sure, that's fine. I don't know what would be more useful. I can send it to you. We can put it up on the screen if that's helpful. Would that be helpful?
That would be
Okay.
a good idea.
You could email it to me.
Certainly, Jen, I'll do that right now.
It's not something you can summarize.
I can, but there's a lot of numbers, and keeping them in your brain would be difficult without seeing them. Maybe I'm underestimating your capacity. I couldn't do it. Go ahead.
The visual will really help with that, Dave.
So while I'm sending it, here we go.
I guess the other reason I didn't include it is because we were still talking about whether this would be presented at the meeting on the 24th or into October, and so
Mhm.
it was unclear.
Sure. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that's, I think, evidence in some sense of, it's important to acknowledge that both the county and the city have, to my understanding, have never done, like, fully executed an abatement, a tax abatement. So this is just, I guess it's worth highlighting, this is a learning curve and opportunity for everybody involved with this. And so we're trying to figure out the different puzzle pieces to make it work in Cook County and for the city of Grand, right? Jen, I just tried to send that to you.
Okay.
Sometimes I have difficulty with this network, things actually sending.
I suppose the other thing to do is just, just stick it on the flash drive
Very
too.
prepared.
Oh, sure.
Just
Oh,
in
look at
case-
you, yeah.
Just in case emails.
Yeah, let's do that. I use my hotspot here usually because
Good
the
old flash drive.
Outlook doesn't like the county for some reason. I don't know why. I'm sorry.
While we're doing that, it is important that we get it on the agenda for the 24th, mostly for a timing point of view. We have a shot of getting the site work done this year, October, November, and then into the snowfall and stuff in December. If we wait till the October meeting, we almost certainly would have to wait until March to start the site work. And the beauty of getting the site work done, or some of it done this year, is to tick it off the list so that, remember, our factory dynamic will make this in Jan, Feb, and March. They will be able to ship it, on the date we want them to ship it, at the end of March or early April, get it on site and set it. They call it a set. So that part is predictable. All the site work is completely unpredictable. How long it's going to take them, what kind of obstacles they're going to incur while they're doing it. So getting a start on it this year and being able to check some of that off the box would be really, really helpful. And that is the main reason for trying to get it done now.
Yeah, on top of that, I think nobody here would be surprised to learn that costs just tend to trend upward over time. So that's, I think, every project ever in the last, I don't know how many years. If you can do it earlier, you'll save money to do it earlier than later. So I think that's part of the incentive to try to get this wrapped up. On top of, I should say that we have some time frames with the ADJOURNMENT grant that we have to adhere to make sure that we don't lose those funds. So we're trying to adhere to those. Of course, in the moment of need, my computer is saying, I don't think I want to cooperate. Well, while I'm trying to get this.
That was actually a virus.
Oh. I did not follow protocol. I thought I could trust, and I guess I cannot.
Yeah.
Wiley, I should write the least expect. Golly. Well, I'm going to try to do this, but in the interim, I think I can lay a couple things out. One, when we came in February, again, we didn't know what this project would quote unquote need. So what we did in both the city and county instances is we said, okay, up to 15 years, which is the not longest, but the longer abatement term per statute. You can go up to 20 years if you ask the school district and they participate, or if you ask the school district and they decline to participate. That's the sort of statutory trigger. We're not doing that, in part because, well, it doesn't matter. The point is we don't think it needs it for 20 years. So what we have done is originally the request or the amount was, I believe, up to $450,000 over the 15-year abatement. We're not asking for that. We're reducing that because, again, we're only trying to provide what the project needs. So there are two things that I think that have importantly changed since the original request. One is, again, that amount. And two, the developer has agreed to, sorry, housing articles are popping up, but I can't get this document up. The developers agreed to what's called a look-back clause. Most developers, actually everyone that I've ever met with, doesn't like them because, for obvious reasons. What it means is Elder's recommendation, the HRA's recommendation, is to agree to provide abatement for 8 years, 80% of the abatement. So there are three things here that are built in to assist I say to the benefit of the county and the city. One is they would be abating, getting an abatement of 80%, so not the full amount of their taxes. So in other words, this project is going to increase in value pretty significantly from what the tax burden is now. So I think right now the county receives, or the total tax liability with everything baked in is about $3,000 a year in this parcel. The increase of that for the total city-county increase of the 20%, right? So not the full amount, but what would be left over is about $13,000 a year. So the city-county would be receiving an additional approximately $13,000 a year during the abatement period. So what the recommendation is we provide abatement for 8 years for sure, because the project projects to need that for sure. And then beyond that, between 8 and 15, depends on this what's called look-back clause. So every project, multifamily, reaches a point, it's called stabilization. Oh, God willing, it reaches stabilization. If it doesn't, there's very big problems. Stabilization is a fancy way of saying the project was built, tenants moved in, and it's been stably occupied for about a year. So it's when the property stabilizes, usually the metric is around 90% plus occupancy. That means it's stabilized, you kind of know what the rents are going to be based on what you've been able to fill. And once you reach that point, again, it's for a year in time, so it's not just initial movement. It's like, okay, it's had a year of basically working. That's what's triggers the look back period. So what happens, and this is the language we're providing to the city and the county via Ellers and HRA attorney, and a lot of back and forth on this to try to get it right. At stabilization, which is usually between year 2 and 3, the Ellers, or whoever the county would like, but let's just pretend it's Ellers, is the financial consultant, will receive all of the perform information for how that building is performed. They will look at it and they will say, based on this performance, do you actually need the full abatement from years 8 to 15?
9 to 15?
Yeah, sorry, correct. Years 9 from 15. So after the first initial abatement run. If the answer is no, you don't need the full abatement, Ellers will provide the recommendation to the county, this is how much they should get. The answer could be yes, because I'll speak from my experience and my perspective. I will be very, very surprised if they don't need it based on the revenues that they're projecting and based on the rents. And in part because there's another project that's being built at the same time. So there's a lot of units to absorb for this small of community, right? So there's a risk there. So I hope that they don't need it. That would be terrific for the project for them. But on the other hand, if they do, it means rents are staying about where they project they're going to stay. So there's sort of a pros and cons on either side of that argument. But the larger point I want to make, there were 3 things. One is 80% of it would be abated. For whether it's for the 8 years or the full 15 years, 20% of that's going to be generated coming back to the community. 8 years is the recommendation for at least through year 8 they receive the abatement. But year 9 to 15 depends on this look back clause that Ellers does on behalf of the county and the city to say they don't need all of it, they need half of it, they need all of it, whatever that recommendation is. So there's sort of 3 built-in mechanisms there to try to protect and provide what the project really needs. It was a lot, but any questions about that?
And I'll add just a little bit too. Back in February, we didn't have complete knowledge of our costs. They were estimates, and they're still estimates because we haven't got all the bids and stuff, and we were doing it slightly differently anyway, our scope for back then. But we've added $500,000 to our budget, the project being that much more expensive. So that's a fact. Also, at the time, Ellers did not really offer us a look back. There was vague talk about it, but in this round, they understand the extra $500,000. We can show them that that's real, and maybe it'll even be higher. But also, we felt it was very fair the way that they constructed the look back. Fair to us. We have a chance of getting that look, getting the abatement for those outlying years, 9 to 15. And as Jason said, if we're above the threshold that they set, we don't need the abatement. And if we are there, then we're, as an investment, we would be very happy with the performance of the project. But as Jason said, The likelihood of that is rather small, partially because half of the units are set in their price. We cannot raise more revenue. We only have 18 units to raise revenue against, and there's the other project, so which we knew about. So that's the same anyway. But with only 18 units, if we're $500,000 short in operating, or $100,000 short in operating budget, we can only amortize that over the market rate units. And then if the market doesn't pay us, then we're out anyway. So that's where the abatement has legs going into years 9 and 15. Is that this is not a pure market rate driven thing. We have limitations, and we have to live with those limitations. And so having that underlying support is a big deal for us. And we thought the way they built the program was very fair.
There are two other things I would think that's worth the board knowing. Sorry, I had to restart my computer. I don't know why. It's feeling the pressure, I guess. Two things worth mentioning that I'm saying from, again, HRA perspective. One is that this developer, it's like 40-something limited partners. I don't know what the number is now. There's a lot of local people that have various amounts invested in the equity piece of this project. They're deferring there's a thing in development called deferred development fee. So every project, almost every project, unless it's very special, even nonprofits, even one roof community housing, they build in what's called a developer fee, because it takes a lot of time and effort, and I can attest this has taken a lot of time and effort for this team to work on this before they even have a shovel on the ground. Because it's totally possible, this is the risk of development, it's totally possible that you do all of that and then nothing happens. So as a part of the reward or compensation for that, almost every project, especially multifamily, builds in a developer fee. And the memo I'm trying to send you, others alludes to this, that it's very common, and usually it's between 2 and 3% of the total development cost. I'm bringing it up because in this particular instance, they are they're deferring the developer fee, which is a common or somewhat common use. You defer it. Usually what happens is if they're trying to get the capital stack right so that they can actually fund the project, a developer will defer it for a few years to get it stabilized, remember that stabilization, and then they'll start taking the fee. In this case, they're deferring it for, I think, 8 years. So they're taking a very small piece for one partner, I think the Northfield-based outfit, who's been originally was involved with assembling this. The rest of it, they're deferring for 8 years, and they're not even doing the full amount that would be normal for this sort of project. So I'm just highlighting that because that's not common in my experience. They're not getting paid. Maybe they don't ever get paid, but if they do get paid, it starts in year 8.
Which there's a look back. Does that factor into whether it's needed or not, or how does the development?
Well, others includes the developer because it's reasonable.
Okay.
They're including this is a very modest developer fee starting in year 8, and they're projecting that as part of it.
Yeah, they're looking at this as a 10-year project. They're using numbers through 10 years. So that developer fee is included, as Jason said, in the profitability of the project. But cash-wise, actually, we won't be able to pay that until year 9 or so anyway. I mean, truly, the net cash flows by year are not substantial enough to make those payments.
And the rent restricted units that Gary referred to are through for 15 years. So it's beyond that sort of 10-year window. So half of them are capped at 80% AMI was the agreement for over the last number of months. The other thing I just want to point out is Assessor Thompson, for abatement, we have to ask the county assessor, hey, what do you think this is worth based on the numbers? Like, what is and they have to be careful, but, caveats and asterisks, like future data will change, I understand. Generally speaking, based on the projections we have today that Ellers has verified, what do you think this project's actually worth when it's done? His projection was $6.1 million. The reason that matters is because the cost to build this is about $8.6 million. So my point is, without assistance like we're trying to provide, these aren't worth what they cost to build. This is a problem across the country, across the state. This is why public-private partnerships are becoming much more ubiquitous, because it doesn't make any financial sense for folks to build something that the income won't, like, it would be, the way around that would be for a developer to be really, really modest with their rents, and then say, look, this is only what we're gonna get, and then jack the rents up after the fact. That's not the case here. Ellers and I both agree. I'm hopeful that they can get the rents that they're projecting to make their project healthy and work. So my point is saying that is clearly there's like a $2.5 million gap in what it's worth from an industry perspective and what they cost to build, and that's why we have the IRRR grant. The HRA has an agreement coming tomorrow for this project to provide some of those match dollars. I just think it's useful to know, like, there's a lot of entities looking at this to see what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, and that's why we're proposing what we're proposing. Anything you want to add to that?
Sure. So some basic math here. Between the IRRR and LK Johnson EDA funds, ARPA funds, we're looking at about $1 million of that 2.4 million amount. The value of the abatement has not been added to that amount yet. And then the rest of it comes from equity. And our 45 limited partners, myself included as a limited partner, have pledged 2.4, well, we've actually pledged $2.6 million altogether, but that includes Birch Bark, which is already spent. So we have 2.4 million for this project of our own money, and that money is funding that gap of is this a sane project to build or not? And the difference between 8.6 and 6.1 is $2.5 million. That's basically all of our money, or less $1 million that we're getting for that assistance. So it's no joke to say nobody would build these projects anywhere in the country without adequate sources. We 45 are a little bit insane in doing this, but every single one of those investors is highly motivated by providing housing to the county. And these are your friends and your neighbors, you know them, and they're more interested in the net result than they are in the profitability of the project.
Yeah, and just as a disclaimer, I mentioned the local investment because I just wanted to highlight that there's local folks trying to solve a local problem. I will also say, concurrent with that, the HRA doesn't really care who is the equity investor is per se. Our role is to not favor local investors or otherwise. Our role is to make the math make sense. I think it's a cool story, but that doesn't justify or not justify the need. So just to be clear on that. Sure. For reasons I do not understand, my computer is not doing anything. It's taken the day off. But James, you may have it in your inbox.
Well, so I was looking, you're saying a memo from Ellers, because I'm not seeing that in my inbox.
Is it this one?
That's the one, yeah.
Okay.
Well, we could pass it around, I suppose. Yeah, I would be happy to send it to you if you don't have it.
When did you send it?
Like maybe 9 o'clock last week someday, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
I'm not seeing it.
I'm sorry. I can't
did
even open my
find
inbox.
I did find some draft documents that you sent on the 9th, but
Okay.
they didn't include a memo from Ellers.
Okay. Yeah, if you don't recognize this, then that's
If
it.
you want to read that.
Yeah,
Let's try to,
there's one, I think the really salient thing to point out is and I don't know if it's it's the second to last page, it's not the
Yeah.
TIF run. It's basically it's the amount, there's a box on the third page that
Yeah.
has the amount of the city and the county proposed abatement. And I think the county's version is 300 something, 323 or something?
Yeah, 353.
It's on there,
And
yeah.
the city is a little less than that. It's based on the tax numbers, which of the total levy, I think 43% is county and 34% is city. And so that relationship is about the same
Yep.
on this, but not about the same, it is. Those are the numbers they're using.
In something that tax nerds may like, and maybe one of you is in that category. But just mechanics, if the property, there are two ways that the abatement, well, aside from the look back, so let's say the look back happens and the project still needs it. Like, so in other words, they're not they're not just like going gangbusters. Either their costs are way less than they thought, which I don't know how, or their rents are way higher, which nobody really wants actually. So let's just assume that they're going to continue along the way that they project. There are two ways that the abatement would be shorter, because what we're proposing is up to 15 years or that amount, whatever happens first. That amount, so the 353 or whatever it is for the county portion. And the original request is up to 450, so we're, almost 100. I thought it was closer to 80.
80,000.
Yeah, so it must be
It's
360.
360.
Is it
Okay.
360?
There
Thank
you
you.
go.
Yeah, I couldn't remember off the top of my head. Oh no, excuse me. The original amount was 475, up to 475, right? No, 450 and 375.
City
Thank you.
was
Sorry,
375.
there's a lot of
yeah.
numbers bouncing around my head. The point is, it's obviously we did the upper amount to see just in case we didn't know, and now we're like, well, we don't need that. Let's get down to what we think we do need. If in the event, so the Eller's numbers are based on the assumption, because this is the best practice, frankly, that there is no appreciation of value over time. Because the reality is there probably will be. And what that means is if the property value goes up, they pay more in taxes, which is good for the city and the county, and they reach that amount faster. So they reach that 363, I think Commissioner Mills said. So either if the valuation goes up, their tax burden will go up theoretically, right? All else being equal. If everybody's property value goes up, then nothing changes, but that never happens. So if the property tax liability goes up, it's from one or two reasons. Either the value of the property has gone up or the tax rates have gone up. Could be both of those things. If the levy increases, tax rates have to go up to compensate, right? So my point is, if they end up paying more per year in taxes than is projected, then they reach that maximum threshold faster and the abatement's done sooner. Or they could, like an example would be if they get a lower interest rate, and the memo talks about this, if they're able to refinance at stabilization, which is very common. The bank's like, we want to wait till the risky period's done. Great, you've stabilized, we can refinance the project. Projects do different points in time. But if you're financed at a lower rate that they're anticipating, because the Fed's been talking, who knows what's actually going to happen, then they will not, then the look back will say that they won't need as much as they need. So there are lots of these mechanisms. That's why it's important for us to build in, here's the amount based on today's current assumptions. But it's structured in such a way that accommodates if things get better for the project, that amount doesn't change. You just hit it sooner. Because if it's better for your project, it means you don't need the abatement as much, or you don't need it as long. So those things are accounted for in how it's formulated. I know that's
So-
complicated, but
Sure. So an illustration of this is, it's a bucket. There's a little hole in the bucket, and what comes out of the hole is the abatement per year, which will fluctuate. So if tax values go up, taxes go up, more water comes out faster, and when it's empty, it's empty. So the risk to the county is only what's in the bucket, not more.
which is the amount that we have diligently tried to figure out what the right amount of liquid in that bucket is. And that's what they'll be asking for at the meeting next week and with the city council. So, analogies aside, any questions?
Well, I appreciate the effort that's gone into the explanation and the fact that, you've shortened up that period of time, potentially, and that we have a look-back clause. I think there are all kinds of things there that make this look better. And I appreciate all the work you've put into it. Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you for the information. I'm trying to take notes.
Yeah.
And I need time to process, so it would have been helpful to have some of this in
Yeah.
writing. Just heads up next time. So I have a question about look-back clause, because
Yep.
I've heard the term before, but I don't quite understand how you're applying it here.
Yep.
So something said 1 to 2 years, one thing said 90% occupancy. Is
Mhm.
it either or? In year 5, it's 90%. That triggers the look, or is it, didn't quite understand how that works.
Yeah, so it's, you're talking about the language in the look back itself that you saw?
Yes.
Yeah, I understand why that's confusing. It's whichever happens first. So it's saying basically typical stabilization is when you reach 90%, right? That's that 90% number. They also, elders wanted to put a cap on how long that would be. So in other words, you don't want to wait 5 years.
Okay.
So you're saying it's either after 2 full years of the like C of O, in other words, people are moving in, start date. It's not when the construction starts, because that's not useful,
Okay.
right? It's
Right,
after it's
yeah,
done
after.
and leases are signed. It's after 2 full years of that, or it's stabilized at 90%, whatever's
Or-
first. Because theoretically, they could be fully leased up in 6 months in, and then a year from that, it's 18 months, right? So you don't need the full 2-year term. So they're looking at either 2 full years after construction's done, or 90% stabilized.
Okay,
Yeah, I know it's confusing.
thank you.
You're welcome.
So in practice, that will be somewhere between years 2 and 3. Well, I mean, two is the cutoff, but remember, as Jason said, construction period doesn't count. So only when we get our CO and we start moving people in. Now, that first year in our budget is a lease-up. We hope to start at X% occupancy, with some pre-leases, and then each month that number will grow until we get, well, full occupancy is considered 95% for an apartment. And the reason is somebody leaves, you got to clean up their unit before you can move the next person in. So there's always little gaps, even in the tightest of markets. Anything over 95 is almost unsustainable. But the cap for the abatement would be at 90, because then you've got good estimates of both revenues and costs.
And theoretically, after 2 years of operating, you'll have a pretty good dial-in of what management costs are, how the building performs, all of that.
Yeah, and I should add to that, the revenue, just because we have rates in the memo, we expect both for market and for EMI. What if we can't get either one or both of those? I mean, it's possible that neither of those will happen. The AMI units are capped, 18 units at these various prices, okay, but again, that's not known. So we may get to this 2-year, 90% time where we're not even realizing the full AMI revenues. And then, of course, market is market, who knows what it is. But I'm pleased to say that our competitive project is still projecting those same prices. The rates that they're advertising right now are the rates that are on the table there, or in the table in the memo, which is on the table also. But
Well, so there was 363, but then there's some factor that adjusts it, and so it is 353.
Okay.
Just, not
Thank
that
you.
matters
Okay.
a lot, but just,
Okay.
I was reading just this big one, because
Because
it's just
there's
363, but then
I
the
can see
further
that.
report, it
Oh,
goes to
yeah,
350.
that's the run, yeah.
thank you for that clarification.
And that's I'm not gonna go too deep in these weeds because
Yeah.
they will get confusing,
Mhm.
but that's
Done.
the present value
Mhm.
of the funds. In other words, the 353 is the literal amount that the county is sending back via abatement, the actual dollar amount. It's not worth that to the project because they have to borrow the money. But that's the amount that's the most important usually for the public, is like, well, what is the check that they're getting? It's the total over 15 years up to 353 in the county's case. Could be less if they don't need it all.
A couple other things I gleaned off of the memo is there's gonna be 18 apartments rented to only those who qualify at 80% AMI or less, and then 18 at market. Of the market, 12 are 1-bedroom, 6 are 2-bedroom. Of the 18 at the 80% AMI, there's 9 studio, 6 1-bedroom, 3 2-bedroom. And then the studio rate for that AMI is $1,358.
That's the cap. That's the maximum amount according to the state of Minnesota. So that's just be clear, that's the 80% today. They update it annually depending on their data, statewide rents and such. But that's the most at 80% that could be charged for each of those units, if that makes sense.
Okay, so how I was reading this is that people would not qualify unless they made less than 80% in AMI. But what you're also saying is that the rent is set
Correct.
at 30% of an annual salary of 80% of AMI.
Yes.
More or less, yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's both of those things.
Yeah.
So that's I would say the one thing that's challenging and frustrating is, and I was asked this on WTIP and I'll repeat it here, we would like, if we could provide enough resources so the rents were $600 a month or something, fantastic. But that's money that doesn't come from nowhere. So it has to be, right? So the math here, I mean, the whole time we've been talking about the 50% of these units being capped, because this development team particularly is trying to fill a niche of workforce housing. My point is, it could be the case, because I don't know, the last 10 years have been kind of a wild ride. It could be the case that rents just progress way faster in Cook County than anybody thought, right? The advantage here is, it doesn't matter for these 80% units. Market rate, quote unquote, could go wild. I don't think it will, but it could go wild. But for 50% of these units, they have to align at maximum with what the state says every year. They publish every year. So that's really from, I guess, the HRA hat. That's the one of the, aside from housing period, which we need, that's one of the advantages to any time we were able to lock in some of these units, is no matter what happens in the market or the world, this is the most you can charge, and you're agreeing to that for this term of time, which is 15 years. They can do beyond that, please. After that's great too, but at least 15 years.
And our overall pro forma is very conservative in most categories. For example, we're anticipating rates, higher rates, like 8% kind of thing, and we may get a good surprise as they move down. But on the revenue side, we're using the math of the maximum amount, and there's some risk there that we're going to achieve the maximum amount on the AMI units. Because again, that there is a market element to that. If there are not enough people that will pay $13.58 for a studio, then we're going to have empty units, or we're going to lower the price. In all likelihood, we would lower the price because it's a better deal to have the building occupied at a lower price than have units empty. In almost all math scenarios, that it works that way. But then we have to find bodies to fill those spaces. So even if you lower the price to 600, at that point, is there anybody who wants and needs the unit?
Yes.
And we say, unfortunately, we have competition. There's more there, but fortunately for the county, we do have. We're going to have a lot of options for people, and that'll put pressure on those prices. So, but for now, we're holding that we're going to get those revenues.
Yeah, and that's not a secret, I think, from the HRA's perspective. Part of the reason we want to support more of these units is because there's competition for people to fill them. So if we were helping 10 units, well, there's a lot more pressure than 10 people. But both of these projects maybe the developers don't love this, but don't care. That's their job. How do we provide more competition? Because if there aren't enough people, I would love to see the project still be healthy, but rents, come where they need to come for people to rent those units.
Yeah.
So that's the risk that every developer takes, is they have to project the rents and try to make sense of it. And if the result is, at least initially or for a while, that rents have to be lowered, that's a win for people renting those units in my mind. So of course, we have to be cognizant of what's the threshold, how much is too much for units. We don't want to create problems. And frankly, banks, I just talked to someone today, somebody called me from an appraisal and bank asking for details on the project in Cook County. I don't even know if it was a housing project. Anyway, I think it was an EDA phone call. Whatever. The bank calls, and if they're doing their due diligence, which they today are very much doing, they want to know what the actual demand is, what are we seeing in the market. They were asking me today, who are the big employers? Is the hospital expanding? Does the county have vacancies? They're trying to figure out what's the real pressure and demand for this sort of thing. So all of that's to say, we're at a point where we don't really know the full absorption. We won't know until things open up. So we're trying to create some competition, see how this works, and then we've got other options in the future if they fill up. So anyway, we can talk about that all day. I'm not going to.
Do you happen to know the 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom for the AMI units?
Yes, the 1-bedroom is $14.55, And the two-bedroom is 1746.
And things may have changed from the other project, what I have written down. For subsidized, I think is how it was, but subsidized in market for the view,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
The studio is 1018.
That's for the 60% AMI units. Mhm.
How many different are there?
There's two sets, there's 60 and 80 in that project.
In that project? Oh, so there's three, there's the 60, 80, and
It's
market?
true mixed income, yeah.
Nice, okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
And,
Very good.
yeah, and I can say that those ones have had the most interest, as you
Sure.
might imagine.
Yeah.
And they've leased, or they've had 5 units spoken for the last time I talked to them about it.
And David, Commissioner Mills, I should say, sorry. I'm worried about those 60% units because they're the same as my 1350 units. They're $350 cheaper. They will lease before mine.
Right.
They may drag us down on those. Now, again, that's bad for us, good for the renters, good for the city and county in that sense. So even though we have those AMI numbers in there, it may turn out to be a better deal for people, you know, than we're talking about. And it's just the way Jason worked with that developer to get what he needed.
Mhm.
They offered up some units at the 60%. So in a lineup, they will always sell faster than ours.
How many are there?
There's 24 units that are rent restricted, 11 of those are 60, 13 are at 80.
Okay. And I don't have the breakdown, and you don't need to get it, but I had 12 two-bedroom, 24 one-bedroom, and 15 studio. So there's some, that's total.
Oh, for that
For
project?
that.
Okay.
I'm just trying to keep
That
it.
sounds
Yeah.
approximately correct, I'd have to double check
But then
though.
I don't know the 60-80 market
Yeah.
breakdown there, so it's not.
Yep, they
super
have,
relevant.
so they have, I will say that doing 2 bedrooms, the larger the bedroom count, the harder it is to do the subsidized units. They're just bigger units and they cost more to build, so, plus, Minnesota Housing appropriately, it's not a single person applying for, that doesn't make any sense.
Mhm.
The presumption is there's at least 3 people in that household.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So it's,
And growing.
yeah. Yeah, and their units, I will say that one of the things I appreciate about this Heights project is they have a number of these 2-bedroom units, and they're classic 2-bedroom size units. The Gunflint View has 2-bedroom. The second bedroom is smaller. It's because they wanted to be flexible, sort of a 1+ den or 2-bedroom model. There's obviously a lot of people now who are working remotely and want an office, whatever those are for the market rate units. They can rent it and have an office in their apartment. Great.
And doing an analysis of this, our 2 bedrooms at the AMI will be the first ones to go in our set. If
Yeah.
if people are shopping both, because our 2 bedrooms at the AMI 1746 is a steal. It's $400, almost $500 lower than their 2 bedrooms. And they don't have any 2 bedrooms in the AMI pool. So we'll win on that one. So we're different, and that's good.
Yep.
That's good. The 2 projects will figure out how to position ourselves against each other, or else we'll fail.
One other question I had, I guess, is in that memo, they had the range for rents being the 1358, right, that's the studio AMI one, and up to the 1900 market. That's not 1900 for 2 bedrooms, is it?
I'm looking
Yes.
for the page you're referring to.
Because the difference between, every dollar counts, but the difference between 1746 and 1900 for a 2-bedroom, it's kind of like, well, that market is not so far off of that.
It's even closer on the 1 bedrooms,
Yeah.
1455 and 1600, or 1555, somewhere in there. The 1600 number is the plan number that everyone used. I could see us lowering it to say 1555 and having a $100 spread. So the spreads are not, as you point out, they're not huge between AMI and regular. But the spreads grow. They're tightest on the studios. They widen a little bit on the 1 bedrooms, and they're humongous on the 2 bedrooms. So the 2 bedroom better have a 2 income housing. And in fact, the dollar wage limit goes up a little bit on 2 bedrooms. It's kind of, it's fun, I'm having trouble with this, but it's $54,000 is the income limit for a 1-person household for a studio or a 2-bedroom, a 1-bedroom. But the 2-bedroom number goes up to $64,000, assuming that there's more people working in that 2-bedroom unit than there are one. So the household income is higher, and then they get the AMI break. But if that happens, I mean, at $60,000 a year, they can afford $1,746 very easily. It's the lowest cost per square foot of all of the units of all of the mix that's in between us and them.
So if you haven't gleaned, it gets complicated with how these things are complicated, how calculated. Commissioner Mills, I wanted to highlight one thing you said. You said the 1-bedroom or the studios that were $1,350. Is that what you had said?
1358.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm not.
Mhm.
This is just for illustrative purposes. According to the state, you know, that's the, and I think that was for the 80%. That's AMI.
That's
right?
80% AMI.
According to the state, quote unquote market is approximately $1,675 or $1,700.
Per student.
Correct.
Mhm.
So they're in their performance, they're not assuming that much. So the point I'm trying to make is market is sort of an amorphous, more than, 100% AMI or above, we don't really know what the rent will be because no one knows. So the numbers are even in here, and the numbers that Gary and his team are assuming are not 100% AMI as according to the state. They're, because I have encouraged, and as we've talked through it, less than that's more pragmatic, and be conservative and plan on renting them for less than that, especially in light of other units coming online. So all of that's just to be clear. The state has the calculator for every county, all 87? Thank you, 87 counties. And this is what they project for Cook County. They publish it each spring annually. So it's not the full 100% AMI. It is slightly less than that because they want to be maybe more pragmatic about what they can get.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to clear that up. And that's the same for all unit sizes.
Mhm.
Okay, any other questions? I will, of course, as soon as my computer decides it's done vacating, I will send you that Eller's memo so you can share with folks. If anybody has any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate. There's a lot of calculations and nuance here, but we can try to muscle through any specifics you have, for sure. And Ellers is more than happy, of course, to help explain stuff if needed.
And I guess, pardon me, just to follow up, so there was a lot of back and forth on this last week.
Yeah.
Because these guys have been working to get information from Ellers to share with the council and the commission. And we're still not clear the development agreement that we would actually be using to enable this abatement. We're still waiting on that from Freiberger, correct?
You shouldn't be, so.
I thought we were.
No, it's okay. So in one of the many emails that I sent you last week about this, we had contemplated tying both of the city and the county agreements to the HRA development agreement, which is tomorrow is going before the board, and then having the look back language in the HRA agreement. We're trying to figure out structurally how to do this the best way, right? The ideal way is to have the city and the county on the same document signed with the developer. So to be clear, the HRA has actually nothing to do with the abatement. We don't have any abatement authority.
Right.
We're providing technical assistance and hiring Ellers to help vet this to make a recommendation for the project. So after working with Ellers and the HRA attorney at Freiberger, lots of figuring out, we determined, okay, what we think is the cleanest and makes the most sense is that each the city and the county have this baked in their agreement, and we provided both you and Mike language and the look back language to put in whatever agreement you want. Attached to that email, you should have one of them, the most recent, I think, that had meat on it, has the template agreement that I sent that you used in February.
Mhm.
Some names and dates probably need to change slightly, but, and if you want the HRA or Freiburg to help with any of that, we're happy to, but again, it's not our documents. We're trying to be careful with, the city's gonna do its own thing, the county's gonna do whatever it needs to do, but we've tried to provide everything that we think that is needed. So again, if we need any clarification on any of that, we can take care of that pretty quickly, I think. But the MO that Ellers, that our attorney, that we're recommending is city and county each, and Mike Roth from our conversation last week is planning on this. He's working with his attorney. You each have your own abatement agreement. It stipulates the amount that the county, up to amount, term and amount, includes the look-back language, refers to the development agreement with the HRA, just to point to the fact that this is all a part of a larger project, that, and there are terms and conditions in the HRA's development agreement, like the 50% AMI units, or the 50% of units, and like no short-term rentals allowed, like those things we're all capturing in our agreement. So the thought was, let's just at least point back and say, we're all doing this, we're rolling in the same direction here for this particular project. In your jurisdiction with the abatement is, here's what we're providing the abatement for and up to these amounts, but also, hey, the HRA is working with them, look at their document too. So again, I'll resend, assuming I can, anything that you need in that regard, but the hope is we can obviously get this on the agenda for the next week's meeting, and I believe the city said that they're ready to do it. And the county already held a public hearing in February.
Right.
The city is doing that next week.
You do have to redo the resolution, not the public hearing,
Yeah,
but the resolution itself.
Yep.
And we've engaged Freiberg, or a different attorney.
oh, sure.
Bob Toffey.
Oh, yeah,
So he's, so they're working within the, I think they're in communication.
Bob and HRA attorney?
Yeah.
Okay, great, yeah.
So that's the caveat. They've got to get that language back to us, and the development agreement, it appeared before, this was last week, I talked to Bob.
Yep.
There were some blanks in the agreement.
Yep.
And we'll have to fill that in. Molly and I will have to see both of those, the resolution and the abatement agreement, and review that before it comes to the board for Tuesday.
Sure.
So assuming, that's the caveat, we've got to get that and be sure that it's got everything we need, so.
Yeah, if you need anything from me or the HRA, let me know. Again, I'm trying to, yeah, I think I've sent you enough, probably too much, but I'm trying to respect, jurisdictions too, and that this is your document, I want you to own whatever you want to own.
When we get it, we'll probably be in contact with you.
Sure. Okay.
Commissioner Metz.
Would it be appropriate to have right of first refusal in these development agreements?
To buy them, if someone wants to. Appropriate for whom?
For any public, I mean, if we're gonna be investing in these, and I'm just thinking about other projects that we've done public investment in, but then it's gone, I mean, there's always the threat of just all market, right? And so, I know we're not in a position right now to do that, but in 15 years, and, all strings are cut and it's free and clear, and developers decide to sell, I think it might be in the community's best interest to have that option to buy.
I would say, yeah, go for it. From my perspective, you don't have to exercise it,
Right.
but build the right in a 15, 20 years, whenever. A lot of these types of projects, and I don't know this particular case, there are what call merchant builders who will build something, get it stabilized so that they have a rent roll to show, and then they'll sell it. So the View project, that's not their model. I don't believe that's what this group is anticipating doing. I don't know.
15 years is a long time.
But no, my point is often they'll sell it after 3 years.
Sure.
But either way, I mean, if they're not ready to buy it after 3 years, you don't exercise the right. But if they hold it for 15 or 20 years, sure, build in the right, then you can just, it's probably as simple as saying, using a third-party assessor to establish the value of the building, the county or city or whomever has a right to acquire this building. First right of refusal, like you said. Why not? You could
And
say.
so that would be something we'd have to communicate with
Yeah.
Freiberg.
Well, yeah, and it's not going to work. I mean, I would say for this project, they might be it's a little late in the game to do that.
Yeah.
Because the agreement's going for the HRA tomorrow and it's
Yeah.
already, right?
No, just, yeah.
But I think, Commissioner Mills, it's not a bad thing to think about with future projects.
Mhm.
I don't know why they would balk at it necessarily either.
Yeah, right, I wouldn't see the problem with it, but just wanted to ask.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? No, there's a lot of stuff
There's a lot
about
of
tax
stuff.
abatement.
Well, thank you very much. It's been very informative, and we'll look forward to getting additional documents and getting this on our agenda for.
Yeah, and I
next
apologize, you didn't get the memo in advance. I thought that those were all sent out, so apologies on my part. I know some people got them, some people barely didn't. So I'll send those as soon as I get back.
If I could make a couple of concluding remarks. First of all, Why abatement? I mean, we did address it very briefly, you know, we needed it financially as a fund. But in our, why is our project asking for an abatement as opposed to the other projects and stuff? And that is, you know, first of all, we bought our own land. We saw an opportunity to buy that lot when we first formed our group, so we jumped on it, knowing that that would be a good housing thing. Then Jason is Wizard of Oz behind the screen, and he's helping all the projects to achieve what they need. We already had the land, he didn't need to help us with the land, and so we looked at the TIF and the tax incremental financing program and the TAF. And the TIF was, if you think TAF is bad, TIF is even worse. So it was an issue of simplification. Let's go for this. And this is the only financial request that we're making of the county. Yes, we have a revolving loan fund commitment from the fund, and that is the county, but we are also going to be paying 8+% on that when we start that loan. So the county will be earning up to $20,000 a year in interest on our loan. And it's an integral part of our financing. But in terms of any handout, anything, there is nothing. And of course, there's only a $3,000 tax value on the property now. That goes to $16,000. So there's an immediate return. One could argue there's really no cost. But if you think of it as a cost, it is the only thing we're asking of you for support for the program. And what's very exciting to us is that we have a phase 2 of this project. And we're going to be beaten down and worn out by the time phase 1 is over. And so our goal is to sell phase 2 to another builder developer who will do a complementary project. And the best thing we have is we have an interested party who is going to be here on next Monday. I hope to introduce them to James. And we have an opportunity to sell the county to them to come in and do it. If we talk about a lot of units now, there would be a potential other 24 units. And one of the concepts they're looking at is a daycare center inside the building, which would be a home run. And so they're doing layouts and things like that to kind of see how that would work. But potentially, this could be another really interesting twist. And those units will probably be almost all in the 60% range. First of all, we want them to be at 60% so they don't interfere with our 1 and 2 bedroom stuff. And we can make that happen. And finally, I'd like to conclude by saying what you're doing here now is you're talking about a tool for development, tax abatement, that if we get this going in the county and the city, that this is a legitimate tool, that people understand that this is a legitimate tool to help drive this. I'm speaking for the 20 projects that will come in the future that will be asking for help from the county. And the ones that you deem to be worthy of this benefit, we are paving the way for them. I like to think of it that way. Because these are the kinds of things that will really help projects get over the hurdle and make it. And that's what Cook County needs, and that's what you have the opportunity to fuel here with your votes. So, thank you all very much.
I have one cherry on top, just that I wanted to add. At the end if this project is built, according to the assessor's office and current tax rates and such, it will generate about $71,000 a year in taxes.
Oh, yeah.
So I just like to remind folks and phrase it as this is like the gift that gives for as long as the building is in service. Helpful to keep in mind.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. There's a lot of time. I appreciate it very much.
Well, we appreciate the work and effort you've put into this. We appreciate the concern that people in the community have about housing. We've had this need for a long time, And we appreciate the work that's being done to fill today's housing need as well as lay groundwork for the future. That's really important.
I will send that to you.
All right, thank you
Thank you
both.
very much, Commissioners, appreciate it.
Have a great day. All right, well, we have talked at length about tax abatement for the Heights apartment complex up the hill next to Up Yonder. And now we're going to move into some other numbers work as we look at the 2025 budget planning that we've been engaged in. We set a preliminary levy last week, and we're continuing to want to spend time in our work sessions to look at different mechanisms, different approaches to get that levy down. And we'll ask Auditor Powers to join us up here. One of the microphones as we get ready to take a look at budget planning. So again, last week at our regular business meeting, we approved the preliminary levy at 9.81%. One thing I'd like to share, and I'm sure other commissioners have looked as well, I've been following other counties, and the range is really interesting when we look at some of the levies. I looked at Nobles County, 12%. It seems like the range is coming in between 7 and 12% from what I gather. And for those that were at the AMC Policy Committee, I'm sure you've talked with a lot of other commissioners about what's going on in their communities. Commissioner Mills or Storley, anything you would like to share that you've learned about county levies?
Nothing other than they're trying to figure out how they got to 12 and 13%, but you know, as we're doing too, looking it all over again, and sometimes they pray for hidden funds somewhere that nobody knows about except their auditor.
Well, I know that it seems like everybody is experiencing, you know, they're looking at COLA. Some of the counties I spoke with, Polk County pops into my mind, they were doing a market rate correction. So that's some of the things that we've done already that other counties are looking at that are causing some of those higher, like 12% rates. But anyway, it looks like all counties are kind of in the same boat right now, and are setting their preliminary levies and looking at what they can do. We really would like to achieve a final levy. We talked about that target of 5%, looking at historically what kind of an average is, and want to be consistent so we don't have those really high spikes that we've had in some years where we've had double-digit increases in the levy, and we don't want to have a zero where we're not preparing for the future. So at this point, I guess I'll turn the conversation over to Administrator Yorkie and Auditor Powers to talk a little bit about their work in the last week with the direction that we've given.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. So in the last week, I have been talking with department heads and also going through the proposed budget to look for places where we could do some trimming. You know, we do have, as you saw on the one-pager with the request for additional resources for next year, we do have a couple of new positions in the general fund. One is a HR generalist, the other is a maintenance position. And those are really, the impetus for including those is, of course, the implementation of the capital improvement plan. And then also the HR generalist is really driven by the strategic plan, which you all approved in spring of this year. There's a lot of new work for the HR department to be doing under that strategic plan. And then we also know that even without that plan, the last few years, the workload has been pretty enormous, and we've lost a couple of directors because of burnout. And so that's something that we're trying to avoid moving forward. The maintenance position, again, just we've got a lot of deferred maintenance, and if we're going to get caught up and get our facilities department in a position where they're being more proactive about how they maintain and operate our buildings, that's a resource that we need. And that's supported by national averages about how many maintenance staff you need based on square footage. And so, when we're looking at, I think Commissioner Johnson, you mentioned a figure of about $550-some thousand that we need to reduce to hit that 5% target. There's a lot of, perhaps a lot of nibbling that we can do across the general fund and the other two big funds, Public Health and Human Services and Highway. But there aren't, in my initial scan through all of it, there aren't a lot of big chunks that we could eliminate, unless we're talking about really cutting back services, right? And I haven't heard the board say we want to look at that possibility, but that's what this conversation is about, is for the board to talk about what it would like to see moving forward. Some of these things, looking at the one-pager again, I've already done some trimming from commissioner, department head, and staff training, whittled that down from, what was it? It was about 150-some thousand, perhaps even more than that. Right now, that's sitting at 31,000, and we could do some further trimming there. We do have already in the budget some money for training, and so that's a potential opportunity. I heard last week also, Commissioner Johnson, you were looking at a couple of the line items for the highway department, the seasonal environmental worker, and saving for the future maintenance worker and tandem truck. I did talk to Robbie about that. He agreed that the not saving for the truck is something that we could probably dispense with fairly easily. He was a little resistant to the idea of not budgeting more for a seasonal environmental worker, but of course everything is subject to negotiation at this point. So there are other things that, looking at this list, the $60,000 to maintain our equipment replacement schedule, I think I've heard, based on discussions that we've had about that the board is pretty adamant that it doesn't want to get behind in replacing equipment. So that's $60,000 that, based on my understanding of what the board is wanting, probably needs to stay in there. Some of these other items we've already agreed to. Back in May or June, I believe it was, the board agreed to fund the extra 0.2 FTE for probation for the administrative assistants, so that they could hire a full-time admin assistant. The extension contract price increase, that is kind of a fixed quantity, and that's been approved already. Payroll software, that's something that has a cost, but it also has some potential benefits in terms of reducing workload and reducing redundancy of effort in processing payroll. So that's something that MIS and HR both have been working with the auditor's office to explore. So I guess I'll just pause there and say there aren't a lot of big chunks that we can take out of this. So the other thing that we have, we can talk about reducing things on the expense side, and we also can look at the revenue side. And we do have the Ty Blatnick funding that we had been setting aside that has amounted in the past years to about $2.15 million. That is something that potentially we could use to offset some of these new expenses. And we could do it, pardon me, we could do it in a way to kind of gradually have the levy absorb those costs over the next, say, 4 to 5 years. So, for example, and I'm not saying that we're not going to further reduce expenses, but I'm saying if we were not to reduce expenses, we could use the Ty Blatnick funding to get pretty close to that 5% target. And then in subsequent years, like if we use 500,000 of it this year, in future years, we could use like 426, 327, 200 in 28, and so on, to the point where you would have spent like 1.5 of that $2.1 million. You still have $600,000 left over at the end.
I just need to clarify, so you're talking about the money that we saved.
That we set aside, that we thought we'd have to pay
Set
back.
aside.
Right,
Okay.
right, yeah.
which I was hoping was going to be set aside for our building projects.
Yes.
Otherwise, you gotta come up with the money there,
Mhm.
so.
Right, I mean, it's
That is
all,
an option, though,
it
but
all,
you're right.
it all comes
But-
from the same place.
It's gonna be choices.
Mhm.
We did have two changes that I've put onto the levy. One of them is, for sure, that was the Arrowhead Regional Corrections.
Mhm.
Stacy gave me those numbers last week, so that's a reduction of about $30,800 from what was in the budget. And then I sent out an email, adjusted the professional service cost in maintenance. And we've got a new director, he hasn't seen the budget yet. But it's one option. We looked at the last 2 years when Brian was here, and we had two, let's say, one really abnormal year. And in this item, this is snow plowing is the major
Mhm.
cost. It's also garbage collection and other things. But the things that really swing big are snow plowing, basically, and heat costs. So those were, the snow plowing was exceptional. And then, so over this 2-year period, and then looking at the cost at 6 months, it looked like you could budget between 130 and 160, because we'd had 165,000 in that line item. But over a longer range, we were averaging between 75 to 85,000. So it's going to swing back and forth a little bit. It's trending up, but it's probably not going to sit at 130. So I said, well, we could cut 20 out of there, and that leaves it at 110 when we've been 85. We just took a big jump because of these last 2 years, rethought it, said that's probably
Reactionary.
overreactionary, yeah. We can cut back and still kind of get the middle ground. So those two are about 50,000, 51,000 to the grid.
One thing that I said I would check on is that Boundary Waters appraisal money that we would potentially set aside. And I have nothing back from St. Louis County yet, so still nothing from our partners. Lake County is continuing to talk about it, but there is no doubt not set aside. Again, the thought there is that might be more appropriate for the 2026 budget.
Yeah, we're doing with the last page with the 2025 requests for additional resources. We're doing a lot of big lifts in that list, and some of the lifts that aren't as big but still add up are for future big lifts down the road, such as the replacement schedule, as well as the future maintenance worker, as well as that reappraisal, and as well as the training. These are all kind of future ongoing things. But if we're really trying to emphasize the lift with our staff and supporting staff with that HR generalist, as well as making sure we have our maintenance taken care of, and then as we've seen with the family services case manager, just if we're really honing in on the addition of staff, then maybe we should really shrink those other lifts and put it off if we can for next year. I feel like we need to invest in people at this point more than our budget or our schedule. I mean, we need it all, but we just can't afford it all right now. And so that's what I'm trying to strategize. Should we need to do now versus what can we, as much as I hate to say it, put off till next year. That's kind of where I'm at. Is boy, we could, so Brady found 50 grand, we can cut back on all the training. Again, even though we need that, it's just we need it all, and we can't necessarily do it all now. So that would get us another 36,000, and then and it is contrary to our strategic plan, but we do have other items that we are working on and towards with our strategic plan. So I'm not trying to be flippant about the strategic plan, just trying to be strategic about the strategic plan.
Under the Sawtooth Bluffs, is that something that it could be into the future for another year?
Yeah, I mean, without full-time parks and trails, we can do it, the planning but without that full-time position, I don't, it seems like a hard thing to do as well, but I haven't asked Tim or Mitch directly about that strategy and the timing of it. You know, I've talked a little bit with Tim about the county comp plan, and I think that is really important. And I really value his expertise. And it doesn't get any more broad as far as our planning is concerned, so it seems really important to their, but as far as the Sawtooth Bluffs itself, I'm less inclined with that one without that full-time staff member to help us navigate.
Well, just what we put together so far is 116,000.
Commissioner White, we haven't heard from you. Any thoughts that you have at this point?
Well, I know that Robbie does an incredible job with his budgeting, with the new equipment and everything. We just recently approved a backup piece of equipment because it was a good deal, but it's like at some point you can become insurance poor, like you can become backup poor with all of the additional pieces of equipment that you buy, just in case the second piece of equipment dies, just in case the third piece of equipment dies. So it's not I think that our highway engineer has done quite a incredible job of his managing of monies and getting monies from the outside. But I think I would agree with Commissioner Mills with the employees of the employees of the county are what makes the health. They're very important to keeping the county running in a healthy manner. And so we need to not skimp on resources for the employees that we already have. But when it comes to acquisitions and buildings and new, perhaps that's where the postponing, not eliminating, but maybe putting things aside and not going forward, but just saying, okay, we know money will always be tight, but at this moment in time, let's just get ready. And this is what Robbie often does, is he's ready for when the monies can show up, he's got the data ready to jump on it for the future projects. So,
So I'd like to ask Auditor Treasurer Powers if we were to look at utilizing some of the Boundary Waters money. And I'm so appreciative that you saved and have planned for our organization, regardless of what happened with that appraisal. Do you have any recommendations about how we might utilize that fund to, let's say, support these key staff positions that we're looking at.
Well, I think the basic plan Administrator Yorkie laid out would be, that a sum this year, if, assuming we didn't do anything else enough to get it to your target, this is assuming you do nothing else, and then use less each year
Each
going
year.
forward as needed. That money is typically used in our budget year to year. That's what it's for, is to offset our levy. We weren't able to use it for those few years, so it's not in our unreserved levy. That was actually put into our due to other governments. That's where it resides. So I think that makes sense. But
So if we were to utilize those funds for those positions, would we be looking at 4 years, 5 years to kind of glide from that 2.1 million down?
there's no way to really know that, because
Mhm.
it has to, if there were no other changes of any kind in our budget, you might be able to make a calculation like that.
Mhm.
But there's so many variations each year. I don't think that you can, it's just an estimate.
Okay.
It's the best you can do.
Commissioner Story.
Did that money incur interest?
Everything we
Everything.
carry incurs
And it was-
interest, but we don't keep, there's probably 3 things we keep track of interest, because the state auditor did away with that many, many years ago, because there's always a tendency to keep each set. Everybody wants their money to earn interest, and they want to get that interest. So all of our monies go into one, it's called pooled interest. So everything goes into one pool and earns interest. We do have to calculate it for E911 and a couple of other things, but otherwise, yes, it is earning interest.
And it's been good.
Yeah, and that's going into our fund balance, and so I don't have that to report today yet, but I think within maybe next week's meeting, certainly the meeting after that, I'll be able to give you that, what our snapshot is for the end of 2023. We've got it at the end of 2022 when we have all our audited numbers, so we'll have that number either next week or the following meeting.
Commissioner Ross.
It took me until just while you were speaking to really change this whole time since our last meeting, I've been thinking about the cut, what can we cut? And so for you, since, even though you said it a little while ago, it took until now for me to really internalize that, and so now I'm like, oh wow, so you're saying we can do everything, but we have to tap into the dollars that I also was thinking was towards our capital needs, but
Well,
there's
this-
that balance, so.
This is a budget proposal, and ultimately it's up to the board to decide which pieces of it you like and which pieces you would like to change. And I'm not necessarily advocating that we just solve our problems by
No,
Yeah.
yeah.
using the
It's
high
not
black
a tool.
money.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it is available, and like Brady said, it's to offset the levy. And now that we have certainty about that revenue moving forward, and we know that we don't have to pay that money back to the feds.
That's the key.
It's an opportunity, so.
Yeah, it's a new paradigm for me, because forever I've been advocating for saving, because we don't know, and now we know, and so I got a lot of mental adjustment here to do.
So I'm thinking about a couple of things. I'm thinking about the Ty Blatnick funding. I'm also thinking that we have some information we'll be getting in the near future from BKB, which will talk about what expenditures we might be considering for rehab or additions to our buildings. And I would like to see that information as well, to have in my head as we're making our budget decisions. because that is a big piece to, not just the puzzle for 2025, but the puzzle as we move forward. And we need to be thinking about 2025, what's right in front of our nose, but we need to be thinking out a decade or 2 decades. And so it's balancing that short-term work that we know we must do with a long-term vision for our county.
James, when is Henry and his group coming, in 2 more weeks?
No, next week.
Next week.
Mhm.
That is,
And he will be coming with some preliminary numbers.
Correct, correct. So they'll present the results of the master planning study for the courthouse and the community center.
Mhm.
And then also we'll have the proposal for the architectural services for the LEC addition.
Mhm.
I think it would be really helpful for us to have all that information before we make decisions about our 2025 budget, because that's part of our future.
And there is time. I mean, you've got until December to
Yeah.
finalize this.
And, yeah.
So we're not making any motions today, just kidding?
Well, we can't. Commissioner
Ask a
Johnson.
question?
Yeah.
So you met with department heads and went over line items?
I haven't talked to all of them,
Oh.
but some of them, yeah.
I'm just, there were some departments where revenues have decreased, projected. And
Mhm.
I'm just wondering if you can provide any perspective of why some list fees, which I assume is charges for things that they do, substantially decreased. Others just are expecting less money in. I don't know why. I'm wondering if you have any.
I don't have those answers offhand, but if there's
Okay.
specific line items that you have questions about, we can get the answers.
But that's what I'm wondering, if you asked any of the departments when you're going over their budget numbers of what can be cut, what can be trimmed, if you've asked them about why.
About revenues,
revenues have
I've
increased.
really focused more on expenses.
Okay, 'cause I think that's another thing that we need to be thinking about as an organization. Is our fee structure correct? Is it appropriate for the services we're providing? And I think, and this is where we need government. We need Brady's office to take your tax statements without a charge. But there's other things that we do or provide that maybe it would be appropriate to charge for those things. And I'm in favor of, because we have such a wealth gap in our community, that we look at a structure, I think especially land services. When you can build a 5-bedroom house for less per square foot than a 600 square foot house. To me, that does not make sense when we want to encourage those smaller homes. So, and I get you can't make that happen today, but talking about land use issues, that's an area that I think we should be looking at. We should be encouraging our department heads to look at what fees are you currently collecting, when's the last time you updated that, and what's it really cost us to do that?
And you know, I'm so glad you brought this up. We did look at some fees and update some things, but I was looking, as I've been thinking about the budget, at the licensure for vacation rentals and comparing it to other counties, other communities, and it's like, you know, I remember the discussion, could we have it double what it is right now and still allow business to operate, but gain some revenue for, so I think looking at all those fees is a really wise thing.
I
And
thought
I
you were
just-
gonna go to cannabis dispensary, you know?
I'm thinking a community center though, because we set a wedding fee
Yep.
and then we doubled it. Because, oh, wait a minute, that fee was not high enough. People, it takes a lot of work and a lot of time to provide that service for a community. I guess we're still getting it, but it helped offset. So those are the kind of things that I appreciate when a department looks at those things. What is it actually costing us to provide this service? What are we getting in return for it? And some of it is, we as government need to provide services, but then there's extra services. And that is where we need to be thinking.
Thank you for bringing that up. Commissioner Mills?
Yeah, that's been another thought I was having too, just about opportunities for revenue. And really, I got excited from our highway department's presentation with the grant writing, the reporting on the grant writing that engineering has done. And it just got me thinking, why don't we have just a grant writer, a county grant writer? I mean, it's a lot of work to apply, administer, and report all the grants. There's a lot of grants coming and going from each department, and generally, each department needs to be an expert, or the grant writer needs to be an expert, like a content expert, but I feel like that is an opportunity that we should really consider, and maybe it's a little late in the game for this year and
But for
this budget,
2026?
but just trying to think of other ways to get dollars, and knowing that there's dollars out there. That was one of the reasons I really advocated hard for, and still will, the Parks and Trails director being full-time, is there's a lot of money out there, and each organization, whether it's a snowmobile club or a bike club, can go after that, but they don't have that staffing capacity really, so it's on a volunteer basis, and so trying to manage all that, it's just not as efficient and not as effective as I think we can do for our community. It's another cost, of course, but I know there's dollars out there, so it's something to think about in the years to come.
Commissioner
And
White?
is there any way to tap into more of the tourist revenues that come into this county? Like we get the lodging, there's a lodging tax, we get a portion of it, but we provide services for all of these people that show up here, right? Law enforcement, streets, highways, all of this, and is there any way to capture more of the revenue that comes from our visitors? For the county, for county services that are required, that we just, like, yeah, well, we're gonna plow the roads, we're gonna fix the roads, we're going to do this, and it's not just county people that it's like, come visit Cook County, and yeah, please, come visit Cook County, but we have to pay for you to be able to get around and visit Cook County, for you to, in the city, it takes, I think, even a greater hit with the sanitation and services that are provided, but I don't know.
Yeah, there's enterprise options, and those are limited. This city has the municipal liquor store and the campground. Those together offset 50% of their levy, so that's nothing to sneeze at all. But it's very limited, our enterprise opportunities, but that is an option. There's local option sales taxes. Those are also applied to residents, though, but it disproportionately taxes visitors, or maybe that's the wrong word.
Yeah.
We get more dollars from visitors, of course, than residents, but the locals still feel that, so it's less than ideal. Beyond that, and also, there's a moratorium on local option sales taxes through 2026, and that's granted by the state. There's a sales tax, transportation sales tax, so that's on fuel, and then there's just the 1% sales tax. And the way the legislature is leaning right now is the maximum is going to be 1%. So that really ties our hands quite a lot. And then the lodging tax, we can capture part of that, and I think that we maxed that out now. There was like a 3 to 5% window, I think, and we now went to the 5%, and it was 3% or something.
On the
like that.
lodging tax admin fee, yeah, we
Yeah.
went to the max,
Yeah.
the 5%.
So otherwise, we're not allowed to touch that. That goes to just visit the county. If we have a lobbyist, we could work to make adjustments to that formula, but there's some competing interests at work there too, so.
Well, the other thing we can look at, and this is more on a legislative viewpoint and something to talk and work with AMC and our colleagues about, is looking at property taxes and making sure that seasonal recreational properties are taxed differently than they currently are. And that is probably the biggest issue and the hottest issue
And the biggest opportunity.
and a great opportunity. And, that's where I believe we should be focusing our efforts.
Yeah, and I had the opportunity to sit in the general government committee at AMC, and there was discussion around that, and people have ideas, well, much like Florida or California, where people are getting, I think maybe Texas as well, and we hear about it here too, people getting taxed out of their homes, right? Because the values keep going higher and the taxes, and their incomes are not going, they're not following. And so in Florida and California, they have like a freeze on your property tax. Actually, it's a freeze on your property value, which.
On increases.
Yeah.
It's a cap on increases. Is that what you're talking about? Because like some areas, your taxes cannot increase more than like 10% in a given year. And that's in response to, in a lot of jurisdictions, assessed values. So we've got a flat levy. Some places have a mill levy where your tax burden is proportional to the assessed value of your home. And in some areas, that's caused people's tax bills to rise by double digits. And so there's some states where they have capped the amount by which your taxes can increase in any given year, your property taxes.
Yeah, so there's another mechanism, but I thought there was also, they were reporting on something in Florida where the property value was frozen.
They've done it here in the 90s. I don't know when it ended, early 2000s, I think. It was called limited market value. And it just capped the percentage that it could go up in a year. And I remember two different numbers had changed during that, like 12% or 15%. So sometimes we get these 50% increase in value of a certain type of property or some individual. It's just, it would take, here, that limit would stay in effect. So eventually, unless all values are going up at double-digit rate, eventually it would catch up, and it wouldn't. It just, it helped with those big jumps.
Yeah.
And it wasn't hard to administer, and I'm really not sure why they just let it expire, the legislature.
I forgot about it.
That's a possibility.
Well, so there was different structures discussed there, and really what AMC is looking at is, what do we already have in place, and is there something we can leverage along those lines to make things more equitable? Instead of introducing these new, I mean, that doesn't sound new, but because other commissioners were referencing other states, and they didn't quite fit, and it seemed like there would be drop-offs, or, just, it didn't seem as level of, a level way to address the problem. So, but I was also asking just about rebates. If there are ways we as a county can administer rebates, property tax rebates, to either seniors, or if it's income-based, or whatever, for property taxes. And I talked a little bit with Brady years back about it, and it sounds like our authority might be a little limited there, but I've also talked with others a little bit just socially. It was Bruce, and I forget who he introduced me to, but I have his card. And they weren't so sure about that. They thought there might be opportunity there, but I haven't had the time to dive in with them, or necessarily the authority to either. But those are some of the things I like to think about, because there are huge discrepancies in our income in the county too. So I like to look at all those options.
I suspect it wouldn't be simple to get that through and pass, for the same reason that the state has such a tight control on assessments all across this. They want to make sure it's everybody's treated the same across the state because so many people have properties in different places.
Right.
And they're very aware of it, so they make darn sure that we're all same page.
Yeah.
Be the same thing here, they might do it, but I think it's gonna be something statewide. I doubt that you'd be allowed to do it as an individual county, but
Yeah.
could be wrong.
And they're also talking about the homestead exclusion,
Yeah.
increasing that. But the reason I thought, well, maybe we can is because of what we do with the childcare provider subsidy. That's just our money that we're giving to the childcare providers. And it's just like, well, wait, other counties aren't doing that. And we're following kind of a state model. So maybe the state's just looking the other way, but I was just thinking, well, why can't we do it for anything else that we see necessary, like keeping people in their homes or, whatever.
Well, I think there's a lot of work for us at the legislature. There always is, but I think in particular, this is going to be really important for us to look at and to be engaged in. And something to talk about with our district meeting and also in St. Paul in December.
So I want to come, if I could, I want to come
Please.
back to what you said, and Commissioner Johnson, what you said about your hope of using the Ty Bladning dollars for our capital investments. We are going to be receiving a lot of information in next week's business meeting that will provide some additional context for this discussion. I think what we can do in the meantime is I'll talk about, with department heads about the revenue question and see if fees could, help us out. I don't see that that's going to be a big source of new revenues. I mean, it would certainly help, and we should always be trying to recalibrate those based on what we think people can and should pay. And maybe the vacation rental fee, I mean, maybe there's some room to increase that. But
The
it's
fee is about one night for what a lot of places rent
Right.
for, so.
So I mean, there's some opportunities there, but again, I mean, we're kind of nibbling around the edges. The big chunks are always personnel. Right. And, and for future year budgeting, I mean, health insurance increases are always going to be a big issue. Hopefully now that we're past really pronounced inflation, we're not going to be looking at huge COLAs in future years, but you never know how things are going to go there. So, but we do have the Ty Bladnick dollars, and they are intended to offset the levy, and so I think it makes sense to look at that and the degree to which we use that to kind of have the new costs fully absorbed in the levy. That's a decision for you all to make. And then we should also be looking for other ways to reduce expenses. So I think maybe we should continue this discussion after next week when we have a clearer picture of what the LEC addition is going to involve and what your desires are regarding the community center and the courthouse.
And one thing you were probably seeing in the revenues, because you were looking at the gross numbers, I think, rather than looking at each department. In the budget, we didn't have not entered the budget for aquatic invasive species. And we haven't always budgeted for that because there's no levy for it.
Right.
We get more funds than we can spend, and so we're just saving money. We've got a reserve for that. But we've put it in. It was in the budget last year, so there were $226,000 of revenue and expense, no levy last year. It's not in the budget this year. So that's $226,000 in the total revenue number that you're not seeing. I made a note, we'll fix that, so it'll be consistent.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Mills.
I was gonna say, I mean, I appreciate your point about nibbling on the edges and the big chunks. I do think the vacation rental could be a big chunk pretty easily, because when we upped that, it paid for a position.
A halftime position.
Thank you, yeah, a halftime position. And so when you start, that adds up pretty quick, depending on how we would adjust that. But yeah, more information is gonna be helpful. December is when it's gonna come down to it, so.
Well, I appreciate everybody digging in and coming up with ideas and looking at things from different perspectives, because that's how we're going to ultimately get to a reasonable levy amount for 2025. So thank you all for that. We have minutes from our standing committees, airport, budget and facilities, building committee, highway advisory, personnel. One thing to note is the airport commission minutes are noted as draft. Actually, all of these are draft. They haven't had their meetings yet to approve them. So just so everybody understands that.
And we'll start putting a watermark on those, so to indicate
good
that they
idea.
are draft.
Good idea, especially for the public.
Then I have a question.
Certainly,
Once
Jen.
they're approved, do they need to go on the next one, or?
I think if they're approved, they go on that webpage for that committee, and it says that they're
Just
approved. I think
published.
that's the place where then you
Okay.
see the approved minutes. All right. Well, with that, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Sure.
So,
Did you?
quarter two